Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the side event for the United Nations second Global Sustainable Mobility Conference. And here today, we're going to be talking about building back to better mobility and accelerating that sustainable transport in the next decade of action. So welcome, everybody. This event is held together with the UIC, the International Union of Railways, the UITP, the International Union of Public Transport, UN Habitat, and ICLE, Local Governments for Sustainable Development. So my name is Lucy Anderton, Head of Sustainability at the International Union of Railways, and I'll be your moderator today. We've got two exciting panels, and first we're going to have three speakers in our first panel. And you'll hear first from Stephanie Holwartz, who is leading from the United Nations Habitat Organization. Then we'll hear from UITP, Philip Turner, and thirdly from Mark Gigon at the UIC. And then we're going to have our second panel where we're really going to hear about the real-life challenges and the plans of achieving the 2030 agenda for public transport across different countries, so it's a really truly global panel giving their perspectives. So first I'm going to hand the floor straight over to Steffi, who's going to speak all about how our performance so far in terms of the 2030 agenda.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and nice to be here today. I'm going to share some few slides. Just one quick second. There we go. You should be able to see the screen. Can you confirm that?
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Super. So my name is Stephanie Holzwart, and I work in the urban mobility team at UN Habitat. I would like to say a few words about the halfway review of the performance of reaching SDG 11.2 access to public transport. You might be familiar with the SDGs. The goal number 11 is the goal on sustainable cities, and it has a target that looks at providing access to safe, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems for all. The indicator that we're currently using to measure that is the proportion of the population that has convenient access to public transport. UN Habitat is the custodian agency. That means that we're responsible for the monitoring and the data collection, but that is done in collaboration with a lot of our esteemed partners that are contributing to the efforts that we're undertaking. We have developed a methodology that is guiding national and local governments to monitor and to report on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're looking at a core indicator of a 500-meter walking access to a transit stop based on the street network. If it's a high-capacity public transport system, we're looking at 1,000-meter access. Just to give a quick glimpse on the global data, the global average for access to public transport is at 49.5%, and we currently have 1,555 cities in our data set. If you look at the regions, one thing that becomes very obvious is that there's large regional disparities. You can see, for example, Western Asia, Northern Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa around 32–33%, and then Northern America and Europe and Australia and New Zealand with higher shares of access to public transport. UN Habitat is making that data available on open source. We have established and developed an urban indicators database, and everyone who is interested can see the data per city online and use it for purposes of monitoring. Now, some questions remain unanswered. The core indicator, as I have explained, looks at a kind of a spatial access to public transport. But what we don't know with this core indicator is if the spatial distribution of public transport is also being translated into the use of public transport. Or, for example, we also with that core indicator would not know the quality of the level of service, for example, of the public transport system and how attractive it is to citizens. Therefore, we are suggesting and proposing to the governments to collect a complementary set of other indicators that could, for example, be around the transit system performance, looking at frequency of the service or affordability of the services, but it could also look at, for example, the model shift of the overall sustainable transport mix to understand also progress and model shifts towards more sustainable modes over time, which I think is a very important aspect to also be tracked. But it could also look at, for example, comfort and accessing opportunities through the public transport system. So we very much encourage the collection of additional indicators that might complement that core indicator of a spatial access. Today, we would like to also announce that we are launching a halfway progress report on SDG 11.2 together with our friends from UITP, the International Association of Public Transport. That report really looks at the current data and the levels of access on a global scale, but it's also looking at complementary indicators, for example, tracking the use of public transport over time, and it gives some good recommendations going forward in how we can accelerate the data collection and the monitoring of SDG 11.2 in the next few years to come until 2030. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention. Back to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Steffi. Really helpful to see the real information and confirm what we thought might be the case, that there's not an equal sort of access to public transport, and that sort of the quality of accessibility to public transport really being a gap that we need to close in the rest of this decade. Thank you. So we're going to pass the floor over to Philip Turner, who's going to speak on behalf of the International Union of Public Transport. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you very much, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining. So I'm Philip Turner, the Head of Sustainable Development at UITP, which stands for the International Association of Public Transport, and we represent global public authorities, operators and industry players around the world. And I think one of our key sort of mission is to advocate for the benefits of public transport. And prior to the build-up to the China conference, we launched our Mobility for Life campaign, which I think has a real core central message, which is essentially, if you invest in public transport, you invest in our futures, which is fundamental to the SDGs. I'm not sure if my presentation is up yet, but I'll crack on regardless. So,
hey, yes, sorry.
Thank you. And as
give me a second, maybe. Just give me a second.
Sure, not a problem. And I think this is a really sort of central time in our journey on the Sustainable Development Goals, and hence, as we reach the halfway point, UITP launched alongside UN Habitat this report on progress against SDG 11.2, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our experts from the UITP Sustainable Development Committee, because they provide a lot of the argumentation for this. And that is essentially, if we want sustainable cities, we need a sustainable transport system. And as pointed out in the SDGs, you need a backbone of public transport taking the lead. And I think for us is that I think it's even more critical now than ever before, that really I think the SDGs point to the future of success. It ensures a resilient city and I think that's critical. And I think public transport should really be seen as an enabler to deliver multiple SDGs, because I think often we forget about the multiple benefits and the human elements of public transport, and the fact that it provides access to opportunities in an urban area, access to jobs, access to healthcare, and it plays a massive role in the climate change conundrum that we've got. So we see very, very clear benefits. There is clear research to support this. But if we are to really put in place the right policies and actions to enhance public transport as envisaged by the SDGs, you need to better measure so you can better manage it, etc. So the next slide. Even though the SDGs are a relatively recent phenomenon, UITP has been collecting public transport ridership information for a number of decades, and I think it's really a critical measure of success. And I think that there are always positive messages to say, and I think I'll always hang on to the positive, because since 2000, public transport ridership has grown by about 20% in all regions. And I think we really see that there are three key elements to that. Growth occurs when you have an increase in public transport supply, but that has to be matched with demand management measures, so things like parking or congestion charging, but also densification measures, so through urban planning, etc. So I think those are the three critical factors for success. But I think one thing that the pandemic has shown, and I think this is quite well demonstrated in the next slide, is that even though we've seen the gains in public transport ridership up until the SDGs and way up until the turn of this decade, the pandemic obviously changed the way that we travel. Cities saw ridership fall by 95%. London, where I'm from, had its lowest levels of ridership since 1875. So really the impact has been huge. And I think the graph here shows you some of we're seeing, a positive trend that ridership is increasing, but it's still down by 40 to 70%. But like I said, there are positive signs, but it has highlighted challenges. Even though ridership has been down, the levels of service has maintained at the levels that we've had previously. It's also shown, research shows that public transport is COVID safe. And I think these are important elements, but I think it highlights critical issues when it comes to measuring SDG 11.2. And the next slide gives you the case study of Brussels, because I think it's illustrative of what we see in some regions. Even though we have roughly 100% of the population which has convenient access to public transport, ridership within the public transport systems has been down by half, but the mode share within the city is dominated by private vehicles. 60% for the pandemic, and it's increased even further. So you might be performing perfectly on SDG 11.2. Actually, when it comes to expanding public transport, I would say ridership, that's taken a significant hit. And I think it highlights one of those key data gaps within the target which we've come across through this report, and also the necessary need to fill in those data gaps. And to me, I think two very quick things is that there is a lag time between infrastructure development and the results that you see. We've only got a few years left to deliver on SD 11.2. So what are those material issues which are relevant to the sector and which can be collected frequently And things like ridership, mode share, etc., are important proxy informations. And I think the other point is that we have to again focus on those human elements, which I think is critical of the SDGs, and things like customer satisfaction really is a critical measure that we have to look at. So the next slide highlights the report's main recommendations. And I think while it says we have a lot of work to do, I think it shows that we have a lot of opportunities to do that. And I think really cities need to take a lead in delivering on the SDGs. So they have a core role in localizing them and supporting national implementation. And really, in order for that to happen, local level data needs to fit into national reporting frameworks. We don't see that often enough. There's a real sort of opportunity there, I think, because it can be aggregated up from the local level to the national level. Again, that's a challenge for 11.2. So cities can't do it alone. They have to be supported and enabled to do that. And the priority has to be given to public transport systems, notably in the current context when we're seeing COVID stimulus funding, because essentially, if you want to invest in our future, you need to invest in your public transport systems, because we said we were going to deliver on the SDGs. So therefore you need to do it. But lastly, and this is my final slide here, we need to encourage people back onto public transport. Evidence shows that it's safe. So we need those politicians and decision makers to give more confidence to people to return. And I really hope that this is what this report tries to do. But also, secondly, I think this is what this conference itself, the UN Sustainable Transport Conference, has a unique opportunity to do. And I think it can really do that by simply declaring a World Public Transport Day in recognition of the huge benefits that our sectors and workers deliver to the wider agenda. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Really, really helpful expansion on some of the points that Steffi's made and make us realise, even though there's this physical accessibility to public transport, the actual ridership and the actual use is still not back to where it used to be, and needs to obviously go a lot further. So and it's really interesting to sort of pinpoint all those other SDGs that public transport supports and can help with, which you know, as you say, a massive opportunity for public transport to make a big impact on a more sustainable future. So I like the idea of a public transport day. Do we get a day off as well, or probably not?
No.
Okay, great, thank you. We're going to now go to our third panelist for this first panel, Marc Guigon. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you.
Now, Marc is Director for Passenger at the International Union of Railways, and has been part of our COVID-19 task force, led our COVID-19 task force, so can talk a bit about the study around how we build back better for better mobility and get into that new normal and make the most of opportunities that we've got to achieve rapid transformation by 2030.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Hello, everybody. So yes, you are right. I set up the UIC COVID-19 task force in February 2020. 2020. And so I will share you what we have done concerning the new normal. So I suppose you see my screen here. Concerning the new normal, first is to describe the trends of the evolution of the mobility behaviors. So the COVID-19 crisis has heavily affected the mobility with new working habits as the acceleration of pre-existing trends, sometimes in some months replacing 10 years of trends. We have seen remote working, meeting online, a large decrease of business mobility, which has social consequences on relocation and housing. We have seen, for example, in France, in Britannia and west of France, depending on the cities, there was an increase of the price of houses from 10% to 50, depending on the city or villages in 1 year. We have seen people leaving inner center cities to rural areas in the far suburb of the country or the cities. During all this period, you have seen that there was also an environmental awareness of the people and of the passengers. There was, first of all, the Greta effect to use the plane shift from air to rail. And maybe you have seen this morning. This morning, there was, you know that there are 2 companies in Italy which are running some trains from Milano to Rome in Italy, which are Trenitalia and Italo. And with an increase of rail traffic, which has quadrupled in 1 decade, from 1 million from 2008 to 4 million, around 4 million in 2018. There is a big impact on Alitalia, which is an airline company. And Alitalia this night shut down shut down. That means that it's the rail sector has taken quite 80% of the traffic from this destination. So it is environmental awareness for that, but also impacts coming from the price and the liberalization when they was open to other competitors in the rail routes. For that, so concerning high-speed trains, so the people now can stay more longer in the train. So the increase of travel time, increase of distances, and also with the development of night trains. During the pandemic and before, you have seen that the air transportation players are actively reduced their cost structure following the COVID crisis and preparing a switch to green propulsion modes at 2035, around that. For the automotive industry, it has already started its environmental transition, focusing on electric cars, which are expected to gain in maturity over the decade. So all these technologies will be mature in around 10 years. That means that the environmental advantage of railway in the 10-15 years will decrease, and we need to be prepared for that in the rail and public transport industry. So we have a short-term opportunity of window of 10-15 years to gain in market share during the post-COVID recovery period, and we need to have that in mind in order to set up some new infrastructure and to give more services to the customers. We believe that the rail stakeholders should be proactive in order to benefit from this window of opportunity. We have seen 3 objectives in the COVID-19 task force, which are to enhance the customer experience, which is one of the most important to have new mobility in public transport, to improve the rail's equation economic equation, and to increase the environmental performance. And for that, we have seen 3 operational enablers would serve the above mentioned objectives. First is innovate in terms of customer service. It is one of the most important things to attract the customers. To invest in infrastructure, a lot of countries are doing that now in Asia and in US, and also we'll see that in Europe in some years. And to foster the competition, that means cooperation between modes and also competition between modes. It is what we have seen with Alitalia in Italy. The actions to be undertaken aim at increasing the rail modal share by securing and expanding its domain of relevance. So you see here that the domain of relevance of the rail is from 200 kilometers to 1,500 kilometers. Before this same table, we said until 900 kilometers. Because people would like also to stay longer in the train. So for the high-speed trains, they can stay longer in the train. And there is an impact also for that on the services of high-speed train and in the development of infrastructure for high-speed trains with new high-speed lines. We have, within the COVID-19 task force, we have set up some recommendations for the actors of the transport. The first one is the railway undertakings, which has to adapt their tariffs and fares and to develop the onboard services. And do not forget, and I've seen my colleague from UITP just before, do not forget to develop the intermodality outside of the natural domain of relevance of the railways. Concerning infrastructure, the main topics and main recommendations are to invest in the development of new long-distance lines. I spoke with the chairman of Polish Railways some weeks ago, and we said that we need to have a high-speed train coming from Paris to Warsaw in order to develop the high-speed lines. Also to improve the traffic management for the infrastructure managers and to improve the environmental performance of infrastructure. Concerning the railway stations, the main topics and the main recommendations are to develop, of course, eco-friendly stations. We know that there are some stations in some countries which are with zero carbon. That means where the emissions are the same that the incomes of energy, to improve the condition of intermodality and also reshape the station. Do not forget stations when you think to increase traffic in rail traffic. The European Commission in the Green Deal would like to double the traffic in high-speed trains in 10 years. Double traffic means double the number of passengers within the stations and not only within the trains. The transport authorities has two levers for developing the rail and public transport. First level is the financing with the support of investment and also support mobility and railway infrastructure and also develop the liberalization, which is a very, very big level, which is not here, which is just after. And also the organization and regulation to create conditions for positive competition and to foster the intermodal cooperation. And recommendation for the suppliers for rolling stock and also all the railway supply chain in order to focus on more environmentally friendly equipment to enhance the production agility and also to develop research program to have lower cost materials or lines, railway lines. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mark. So I think that leads on really well, really, and just talking about just how the opportunities we have and the action we have to take quite urgently this very decade to transform the way that the customer experience is so that we can make rail more desirable, make public transport more desirable, and really get much more market share, and just how critical that is. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to just take a few minutes to answer, I think, any more questions that we have submitted in the chat. And I think, Steffi, you've answered two really interesting questions already in the chat. I don't know if you want to expand upon that now in the minutes we have.
Yeah, I could do that. One question was asked by Advait Limaye on the issue of whether the national and the global averages are weighted against the population or if they're normal averages, and how much of a true picture they are representing. And I already shared what we're using on the national level. We're encouraging countries to use what's called a national sample of cities, knowing very well that reporting on each and every city in each country is going to be a big effort for countries. And we have made some recommendations on picking a representative set of cities, let's say on the national level, that could be utilized for the reporting. We're then also aiming at having 10,000 cities as part of our data set at one point, because we feel that could be what's a global representative sample. So far, as I have shown, we have 1,500 cities, and obviously the more cities we add to that data set, the more closer we get to the regional values. We still feel that the current data already, shows good variations and are somewhat representative. We try to balance between the regions when we did the regional comparisons. But we hope that over time we can add more cities and get even closer to the real values going forward. That was on the first question. On the second question, I think Philip might have already answered quite a bit of it. We were asked the collaborations with other agencies and that help us collect the data. And Advait wanted us to talk a bit more about adding more cities in the future updates. I think we're working hard with many of our partners, adding, as I mentioned, complementary data sets to the spatial indicator. Philip talked very much about the data that comes from the public transport sector, which is very much needed to be able to track the use of public transport, the satisfaction of the public transport services, and so on, which we very much encourage the countries and the cities to also look into and complement the spatial data. Yeah. With that, I hope I have answered the questions that were asked.
Yes,
if there are others, I'll be very happy to do so.
Thank you, Steffi. I think there's a question also for you, Philip, around the chicken and egg scenario. I don't know if you can address that.
Yes, I was typing it up, but it's quicker if I just cover it now. So no, thank you for the question. It's a super interesting one. And I think what we tried to highlight within this report is the need for infrastructure investments to focus on this enhancing people's access to opportunity bit. So rather than doing things on travel time or saying every 400 or 500 meters you have to have a public transport stop, actually look at what people's needs are, ask them what they want, because that doesn't happen often enough. And so rather than having a chicken and egg scenario, actually what you have is a plant which grows together into a healthy tree.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think that's that takes us just to on time then to move on to panel 2. So thank you very much, all three of you, for really interesting presentations and debates. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to now introduce you to our second panel. Okay, so we've got a panel, a really great looking panel here of people from all over the world, really diverse range of people that we're going to hear from now. First up, we're going to have Marta Subira Iroca, who is president of FGC in Catalonia, Spain. And then we're going to hear from Noel Hechanova, who is in Iloilo City in the Philippines. Then we're going to hear from Edwin Mukabana, who's vice president of UITP in Africa and chairman for the Federation of Public Transport Sector in Kenya. And then we're going to hear from Elisabetta Tromelini, who is chairman of the Sustainability Committee at UITP, but also director of CSR and Sustainability at the FNM Group in Italy. And then Sunze Kao, who is a member of UIC, Task Force, Sustainability Task Force, and also research associate at the China Academy of Railway Services Limited. So welcome all 5 of you. Marta, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. I think you're going to do just a short introduction with some slides, is that right?
I'm sorry, I don't have that is right. I understand that the slides, you presented it, so I am, yes, okay.
Yes, I can do that, yeah.
Thank you very much. So hello from Barcelona, dear ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and an honor for Ferrocarrils de la Generalitat de Catalunya to participate at this second United Nations Global Sustainable Transport Conference. As time is short, I will move directly to my presentation and the 3 main concepts I would like to share with you today. First slide, let me begin by introducing a little bit the company I preside, Ferrocarrils de la Generalitat de Catalunya. We are a railway company based in Barcelona and owned by the Catalan government. Besides operating the busiest suburban rail lines at Barcelona greater metropolitan area, we operate a wide range of businesses, both at the rail sector, freight, regional, and the tourism sector, specialized in mountain resorts and tourist train services. In fact, we operate 6 ski stations, and the only 2 rack railways in Spain. So despite our modest size, around 2,000 employees, we are a company with a huge local and territorial impact, as our activity is essential to the development of the whole region, from the dense metropolis of Barcelona to the rural areas in the Pyrenees. And linked to this essential role within the society, we are also an ambitious and innovative company. We are locally and internationally recognized for our ability to deliver with quality and reliability. But the results we achieve do not come only from the technical and professional excellence, that they come from our approach focused on the customer and the link with the society we serve. It has been this approach, sustained over the years, that has generated a true company culture of service and awareness of our role and responsibility. So it felt natural to integrate our contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, not just internally. Of course, we as a company are moving to make our activity as sustainable as possible, but we have also taken responsibility on boosting the change on all the ecosystems in which we are active. And the best way to do so is leading by example, not only words or plans. So that is my first message. Public transport companies must commit and take action. We can't be bystanders. We must be pioneers, leaders, and activists of the transition. And in crisis situation like the one that we are facing, this leadership is more needed than ever. If we go to slide 2, a crisis as the COVID-19 pandemic has somehow put us in front of a mirror. We had been talking about mid and long-term global challenges when unexpectedly we've had to face an unprecedented global crisis that spread worldwide in a matter of weeks. During this crisis, essential services were responsible for keeping our cities and our societies active and alive. Public transport arose as one of these essential services. Despite the drop of passengers, despite the uncertainty on the initial stages of the pandemic, public transport did never stop so essential workers could reach their positions in a safe and efficient way. I will always be grateful to our workers for their service and commitment on these days. But it is also true that we have suffered a huge impact on ridership, and we are yet to see how fast passengers' levels will recover, because they must recover, as the main challenges, those that we're already facing in 2019, are still there, more urgent than ever. I am optimistic on the recovery of the ridership. In fact, I feel that the global health crisis has made our societies even more aware of the global challenges. Following this awareness, we will see, and we are already seeing, an acceleration on behavioral changes and an increased pressure on public transport systems in order to deliver a suitable, sustainable transport alternative. So this is my second message today. Beyond its dramatic impacts, the pandemic has accelerated changes, and by acknowledging its role as essential service, increased pressure on public transport. And this brings me to my last slide, the issue of coping with this increased pressure. And my third and last message, public transport not only can, but it must deliver. Public transport is essential to the sustainability of cities and metropolitan areas. It provides capacity, reliability, and efficiency in transport by preserving accessibility, inclusivity, and optimizing the use of the scarcest public resource in cities, which is land. No metropolitan area will succeed in achieving the triple helix of sustainability, environmental, economic, and social, without placing public transport as its center. Let me introduce you to FGC's approach. We are no longer train operators, we are mobility agents, and as such, we must keep a broad view of the mobility system as a whole. This broad side covers the whole system, from the large infrastructure projects that shape land and territories to the small local actions that could provide the required additional competitive edge into creating a sustainable transport chain. Because that is the concept we must focus on, the creation of sustainable transport chains door to door. We must integrate our highly efficient, high-capacity public transport systems with first and last mile solutions, which should be at least as sustainable as mass transport itself. I don't have time to mention examples of this integration that we are developing at FGC, but despite their modesty, they are essential to the global success of the whole system. And there is one thing they all have in common, technology. Even the simplest solution multiply their effects thanks to digitalization and its integration within the whole system. I finish with this last nice picture. Of course, it's not a commuter. It's one of our clients reaching Vall de Núria, Núria Valley, an isolated valley 2,000 meters high in the Pyrenees. And she has done so by means of a sustainable transport, an example of how, even in the less favorable conditions, public transport can create sustainable door-to-door solutions for commuters and for mobility in general. So these were my three messages today. Public transport companies must play a key role in the mobility transition by leading and taking action now. A call for action that COVID-19 crisis has not but accelerated, and a pressure to which public transport can and will answer by boosting a mobility transformation beyond its own operational reach. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I look forward to keep sharing ideas during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. Really interesting, and quite right. The transformations of digital and multimodal, of that seamless interconnection is really going to transform what we need to do. So thank you. I'm going to move on quickly to Noel now. Welcome, Noel.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I'm just gonna upload my presentation now. Okay, thank you very much. So let me start by giving you a brief background of our city. So we are a city in central Philippines, and we are one of the highly urbanized city in the Philippines with 500,000 people.
No, we don't see your slides yet. We just see your, if you open up the, we can see your folder explorer, but not your presentation.
You share?
Otherwise, I can share.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a second, so give me a second.
Okay. Everyone can see my slides now? All right. Thank you very much for waiting. So we are just like I was saying a while ago, we are one of the highly urbanized city in the Philippines, and we are 500,000 people. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so just like any other rapidly urbanizing city in the Philippines, we have an uncontrolled growth, and transportation demand is greater than ever. Car and motorcycle sales are increasing faster than commercial vehicles due to affordable loans. No? So we are experiencing urban chaos. Walking in downtown areas become unsafe as cars and motorcycles take over our pedestrian lanes. Traffic is getting worse, and mobile sources is responsible for elevated particulate matter emission, high level of nitrogen dioxide, and high level of volatile organic compound. Next slide, please. So in response to these problems, the first thing that we did was to improve our public transport system. So one of the issues, urgent issues, is traffic congestions, and we have a duplication of routes in major thoroughfares. So this was a project regarding the perimeter boundary ordinance. We have established jeepney terminals to regulate the entry of provincial jeepneys in the city. So these are terminals actually in all our boundaries. So with this project, we were able to avoid more than 29 tons of greenhouse gas per day, and we were able to avoid nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and particulate matter. Next slide, please. And the next project that we did was to address the congestion and traffic as one of the city's major source of pollution. And then, of course, the increasing population of private cars due to affordable car loans. So this project is the construction of a 6-kilometer bike lane with several bike lanes now completed in major thoroughfares. So another intervention that we did was to pass a local ordinance requiring all buildings to provide safe bicycle parking zones coupled with no parking policies. So what do we want to achieve? We want to promote cycling. So with cycling, we coupled it with walking. So since 2013, we have organized events, and for Fun Run, we have public participation ranging from 1,000 for small events to as big as 30,000 for big events. And of course, there were also cycling events, which we organized in 2013, since 2013, I mean, with participation ranging from 200 to 6,000 cyclists. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, okay, so now, so what did we benefit from this campaign? We have noted the increasing number of bike shops, indicating that the growing popularity of cycling in the city. And although cycling is a weekend event in the past, some commercial establishments have reported a number of bike-to-work personnel which are being initiated. So both cycling and walking events were initiated by the city government in 2013. However, the city government is happy to note that a number of private groups have initiated cycling and walking events themselves. And the Iloilo Bike Festival continues to draw cyclists as large as 20,000 until it was hampered by the pandemic. So walking is now a permanent event in all our public parks. Next slide, please. So providing accessibility. So in order to create walkable communities, we have encouraged the use of public plazas and open spaces. So we have 7. These were built during the Spanish time. And what did we do to encourage walking? We made the plazas attractive, landscaping and rehabilitation projects. We promote its historical values, and we introduce flexible use of the plaza, like for sports, festivals, and cultural events. And then, of course, we increase the number of parks by building additional open spaces for people to walk. And one example of this is the construction of river Esplanade. We started only with 2 esplanades in 2012, and today we have 10 actually, and 2 more are coming. Okay, and the construction of the Esplanade 1 and 2, joggers and walkers there have increased since then. No? Today we estimated around 2,000 to 3,000 daily who use these facilities. And so Esplanade 1 and 2 is inspired many more other parks that we are building today. Okay, this is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really interesting to hear about the, that active travel and just how to design a city to really encourage bicycles and walking. So thank you, really interesting. Thank you. We're going to pass straight on now. There you are, Elisabetta. If you want to take 3 minutes just to introduce yourself and your work. Thank you.
Yes, Lucy, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me at this Back to Better Mobility conference. I'm going to share a few slides now. Let's see if... Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see it fine.
Can you hear me well?
We can, loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like, as I introduce myself, I am the chair of the Sustainable Development Commission Committee of UITP, and I am director of the Sustainability Department at FNM, Ferrovie Nord Milano. First of all, I would like to just present the Sustainable Development Committee and to tell you about our work or the work we are doing in the committee. Sustainable development is at the heart of UITP activities, and the committee is one of YTP working bodies. Within the Sustainable Development Committee, transport operators, authorities, and industry cooperate on all issues related to urban transport and sustainable development to support the positive contribution public transport makes to SDGs. The committee addresses global challenges and starting with my presidency is operating in working groups with the following thematic priorities that you can see in the slide. First of all, renewable energy and energy transition in public transport, then climate change mitigation, adaptation and resilience, public transport contributing to the sustainable development goals is one of the working group, and in addition to recovering and restoring trust in public transport following the COVID-19. This last thematic is transversal to the other committees, and we work together to pursue the objectives. As you can see, a working group is fully dedicated to the SDGs agenda of 2030, of course, focusing on the 11.2 target. I want to, let me see, go next here. Now, I just would like to present a case study, the case study of Ferrovie Nord Milano, in particularly how company's business is contributing to the achievement of the SDGs. A quick overview, who is FNM, Ferrovie Nord Milano, is a leading, you can see in these slides, is a leading integrated sustainable mobility group in Lombardy region in Italy. Is the first organization in the country, in Italy, to combine railway infrastructures management, road transport, and motorway infrastructure. The aim of the group is to propose an innovative model to manage mobility design to support optimization of flows as well of environmental and economic sustainability. We see here, I show you the core business segments. Rosco and service, that is leasing of rolling stock in local public transport and freight logistics sector. Then railway and infrastructure management, road passenger mobility, and starting from this year, motorway infrastructure management. Here I will show you a representation of the business of the company, and where the main capital elements are related to the achievement of sustainable development goals. The capital elements, which are the outcome of the activities, are in line also with the GRI standards for sustainability reporting. As you can see, different types of capitals are described. For example, material and immaterial resources that have been increased, decreased, or transformed as a result of all the organization activities and output, and that determine, of course, the creation of value. The business model has been also fine-tuned in line with the principle of the integrated reporting framework. The group, the FNM Group business model takes into account the use of financial production and intellectual, human, natural, and social and relationship capital. These capital elements, together with the ESG, environmental, social, and governance, risk management system, and all the sustainability governance system, enable the group to offer a service, the so-called output, and to create environmental, social, and economic impacts. They are so-called outcome. As a direct expression of the group's contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of Agenda 2030. Sorry. I would like to thank you for your attention, and I give the floor to Lucy.
Thank you, Elisabetta. It's just perfect sort of illustration of that bottom-up reporting that we were talking about earlier, and how important it is to sort of really demonstrate the sustainability outcomes from public transport and how it links to so many of the Sustainable Development Goals. Really, really interesting process that you have there. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, so stick around. We'll have a panel later. Thank you. And I think if we can, if Edwin's is there to take 3 minutes to introduce himself as well.
Thank you, Lucy. I think I was using Teams, and I think it is holding my camera, so yes. I'm unable to project. I don't know what happened. I must have done something with the settings. So
we can hear you fine, at least.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very, very healthy discussion, and thank you very much for hosting me, and also for holding this important meeting. I will start by introducing myself. My name is Edwin Smukabana. I'm basically a bus operator, but I've been associated with UITP for 17 years. And now I'm the Vice President of UITP representing Africa. I also happen to be a bus operator in Kenya, but I also chair the Federation of Public Transport Sector, which is an apex association of all lobby groups that lobby for passenger transport improvement. I also then chair the task force that is meant to improve, to change transport from the paratransit to a more formal kind of operation. And therefore, SDG and sustainable transport is key in our agenda. But we have issues. Maybe let me talk a bit about Nairobi. Nairobi is the headquarters of UNEP and Habitat. So it's very important that we focus on sustainable transport because we want a sustainable city. We have a day population of about 7.5 million people. But the city is very car oriented with over about 1.2 million cars, and everything have been built around the private car. The modes, we have a commuter rail that we are developing, which is coming up very well, but we are also trying to move towards bus rapid transit. We have 5 corridors that have been identified. And within those corridors, one of the challenges we are having is which type of vehicle are we going to use for sustainability? A lot of thinking is around, do we go to Euro 5, Euro 6, or do we go for electrical vehicles straight away? We would like to move, the preference, if affordability would allow, is to go to electric vehicles because already our energy is 70% sustainable. It comes from sustainable sources, 70% of it. So it's a very good thing to do. We have a lot of vehicles, second-hand vehicles that have been imported, which means the vehicles are more polluted. They pollute more than they are expected, because then the vehicles come from the developed world back to us. And that's what we are using both for public transport and also for private car. The other menace now that coming in, which is now the motorcycle taxi, which is growing at a very high rate. There is also need to move that motor vehicle cycle from the one-stroke, two-stroke engines to electric motorcycles. Cycling is taking place, and of late we have seen a lot of infrastructure improvement towards NMT facilities. This now is encouraging people to walk, people to cycle, and we've started seeing some changes on our roads. But there is still a problem on infrastructure, because the other day we just built an expressway, a double stories road, which you can still see that that money should have gone towards public transport, but it was channeled to an infrastructure that some of us think was not absolutely necessary. I don't think it can solve congestion, but that is what it was meant to do. So when it comes to the issue of life-changing and the plans of achieving the 2030 agenda on sustainable transport, we have challenges in terms of capacity building. In the capacity building, meaning that the people on the side of government and even us as operators, we have a challenge in terms of understanding what is sustainable, what are SDGs, and how do we improve and how do we work towards improving them. But slowly, things are starting to change, and we can see government getting responsive now and trying to understand, but now the challenge is being that capacity building and funding. Now, funding sustainable transport is still a big issue. We are discussing with global funding mechanisms, climatic change people, and how can we fund the public transport? How can I call it? How can we fund EV infrastructure, for example? You want to move to electric vehicles, but where is the infrastructure itself? This is becoming a big challenge. Now, of late,
Edwin, I'll come back to you with the questions if that's okay, and because we've just got one more panelist to introduce, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Really, really interesting, and yeah, some challenging things which I'd like to delve into more in our discussion. Straight after we hear from Sunze Kao from CARS. You have the floor, Sunze.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I will share my screen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Sunze Cao, the UIC member and research associate from China Academy of Railway Sciences, which is also known as CARS. CARS is part of the Global Rail Sustainability Task Force, one of those representing the Asian Pacific region alongside those from American, African, Middle Eastern, and European region. The task force brings together an ambitious and optimistic global vision of rail in 2030. It is a great pleasure for me to deliver the presentation about rail as the backbone of an interconnected and transformed sustainable mobility system for passengers and freight. So to design a better future, the Global Rail Sustainability Task Force has proposed to prioritize the points for the 2030 vision of rail. First, by 2030, we have to implement a change in the transport paradigm, relying on a holistic approach led by a global decarbonization strategy built on the triptych avoid, shift, and improve. We have to design today the tools that will make modal shift to rail and public transport desirable. Besides, by 2030, high-speed rail traffic must double globally. Following the COVID dip, rail passenger numbers have to recover and rail's market share must increase by 50% from pre-pandemic levels. So how will we have achieved the vision of rail 2030? The task force has proposed the following measures. First is transforming customer experience. We need cultural transformation for rail towards a more customer-focused service for the changing needs and behaviors of freight and passengers. The second is seamless interconnectivity. Radical innovations in physical and digital connectivity with other modes for door-to-door service and greater system resilience is necessary. And third is transforming cities and connecting communities. Rail focuses on transport-oriented development, lighter trains, and green city logistics. Therefore, the role of rail in creating livable cities and connected communities is important. And finally, the last one, innovating energy and technology. With the shortened cycle of innovation, rail takes a leading role in the race to zero carbon and in the renewable revolution. The organization that I work for, the CARS, is the only comprehensive research institute in China railway industry, and it has done some research on specific plans for sustainable railway development in China. And there are in total of 4 main points put forward. The first is to increase the proportion of green railway transportation by building on an intensive and efficient fast rail passenger transport system and a low carbon freight service system. Besides, efficient and economical use of resources and energy is important. Furthermore, rail should promote energy saving, emission reduction, and pollution prevention through structural, technical, and managerial approaches. Last but not least is to strengthen environmental protection and ecological restoration. And thanks for your attention. That's all my presentation. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Sunze. Really great introduction too. we will go indeed straight into that discussion. So if we could have all panelists with their cameras up, that would be great. And I'm going with, I've got a first question I'd like to address to the panel, and then of course if the audience would like to ask any more questions, please feel free to do that in the chat. But first I want to, and perhaps I can see you pop up now, Marta, so that first pop up, so I can come to you first, if that's all right. I wanted to ask about what you think what transport related policies are really needed now. If we're talking to our policymakers, what do we need them to design to really help accelerate the progress towards sustainable mobility globally, and how we can accelerate that recovery from 2019, the COVID-19 recovery pandemic, and what strategies are really need to support the achievement of the SDGs. So a big question, I guess, but what are those key policies to really help us accelerate action? Marta. Oh, you're on mute.
Now, thank you for the question. I think it's really important. We've seen with all the presentations that achieve sustainable mobility is essential to the achievement of the SDGs. So we need strategies that integrate public transport as an essential service, as I said, at the same level as water and energy supply or communications from the very beginning of planning and land development. It should be seen as a right, not a privilege or an advantage. As an essential element, regulations should guarantee universal access to public transport in an affordable and non-discriminatory way. So it's essential also to include private partnerships and projects. And this private participation could include, but should not be limited only to investment. It should participate on the innovation on the transport system and on the development of new transport solutions. But it should be done in a regulated environment, guaranteeing neutrality of the system. I think that all of this can really help to accelerate progress towards sustainable mobility and also to accelerate COVID-19 recovery strategies.
Sorry. Well, thank you, Marta. Noel, if you want to build on that from your point of view.
Yes, thank you, Lucy. The pandemic were able to show to us that cycling and walking could be fun. And we have noted a lot of people doing this during this time. And, we are not really a big city yet. We are one of the smaller cities, but we are experiencing urban chaos as well and rapid urbanization. And I think in our city, walking, for that matter, pedestrianization and cycling, going to work is much doable. So while we are not really that big yet, we want to promote cycling and pedestrianization. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. So Elisabetta, I'll come to you next.
Yes, Lucy, thank you for the question. Another point is that the extensive use of smart working during the last 18 months will last also in the post-pandemic period, even though to a lesser extent. So we will face what we call a new normal that will impact our cities and our lifestyles. Therefore, new modes of transport, for example, like as they said, electric kick scooter, e-bikes, etc., will be enhanced and strengthened. And all this will drive to public transport companies to find a new way of dealing with and bet on intermodality system. So I think that in order to reduce, of course, the use, the main point that is the use of private car, and to promote a sustainable mobility system, it's mandatory to focus on the rail system, around which other mobility and micro mobility modes, and of course infrastructure such as e-charging stations and so on must be encouraged and stressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Edwins, if you're still there, perhaps you could give your perspective for the key policies that have been important for the African region and Kenya.
Thank you very much. I think key policies that we would like to see is a policy on funding for public transport, so that before there has been a lot of emphasis in funding infrastructure, but not funding public transport. And now we would like a shift to move towards the software of transport and leave the hardware slightly behind. We also think that it's time to look at innovation. We are still a lot cash-based economy, and we want policies that are going to enable us move to a cashless economy, because we know that handling cash assists spread COVID-19. So any policy that shifts us towards technology, because we know that the Internet of Things have changed how people are doing business. We know that there are many orders that are being made through digital taxis to be delivered in the house, whereas people used to go to places to eat. We know that people are ordering merchandise through deliveries than going to the market to buy them. So we would like to see how is technology going to assist public transport, and how do we get out of it to ensure that we keep people in buses, but at the same time, we understand what is going to happen in the new normal. For example, in Kenya, there's been a big drift towards the digital taxis. And we just wondering, when will people come back to the public transport from the digital taxis? There's a big shift towards walking and cycling. We are wondering, how shall we sustain public transport if that remains the trend? I think Mata talked about the politicians coming to talk and driving us towards what should happen. These are key policy issues that we'd like to see coming through on the African continent. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Edwin. Sunzay.
I think transport-related policies should be considered comprehensively, including rail, road, aviation, and shipping as a whole. So for the railway sector, it needs the support of policymakers and political leaders to do. I think there are three things to do, namely incentivize, invest, and promote. For the incentivize, it's essential to set binding and ambitious transport model shifts and decarbonization targets, to use fiscal policy to incentivize the use of rail logistics and public transport, pricing the external environmental cost of transport, and creating social tariffs and reduce administrative restrictions for cross-border travel. In terms of the investment, policymakers should support investment in the public transport, rail logistics, infrastructure, and rolling stock for transformational projects that will have a major impact on customer experience, such as digitalization, seamless interconnection between modes and capacity. And lastly, promotion can help build confidence for passengers to return back to the public transport and inform the public officials on the benefits of public transport. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, really, it's great that you've all got slightly, you know, built on each other's ideas on that. And I think it's clear that there's, we really need that comprehensive policy on transport to really encourage the shift that we need and the recovery that is so urgent this decade. So I'm going to ask my second question, if that's okay. And we've only got about 10 minutes left, so a brief answer would be appreciated, of course. If you could perhaps share a little bit of some of the best practice solutions that you found have been really, really successful in your sort of part of the world. What's really been the change that you're seeing that as a result of those best practices? So if I come to you first, Marta.
Yes, I don't know if it's really a best practice, because unfortunately, due to COVID, many commuters have moved to private car as first choice mobility mode, as it provides a safe environment. But we can already see high congestion levels, so private cars are definitely not the solution. But in terms of public transport, passengers need time to regain confidence. But our data shows that demand is recovering as economy recovers and as administrative restrictions are lifted. In fact, local demand in our tourist services is very high. So the lack of confidence could not be in the long run as much an issue as we expected. So what we should do is to guarantee that when passengers return, they find a public transport even better, not just in terms of sanitary provisions, but also service, reliability, etc. I think that we should achieve a mental switch in which public transport is no longer a last resource option, but the option by choice of the citizens. And we are working very hard on that in gaining confidence. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Marta. Yeah, Noel, from the Philippines, would you like to highlight any best practice that's really making a difference?
Yeah, while we are still promoting cycling and walking pedestrianization, we have piloted other practices like, you know, carless day. This was a highly successful event here in the city, and I think if we have an ordinance requiring schools to have buses instead of carpooling, I could foresee a very effective solution to reduce traffic in private schools. You know, private schools here are major causes of traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Those kind of national days which can really highlight the issue. Elisabetta.
Yes, I think there are many best practice, of course, because every city, every region approach it in a different way according to their needs. Certainly a series of prevention and sanitization measures were similar for all the transport providers. On the other hand, operators experience negative impact due to the loss of passengers and of course negative economic implication. I think that today, as also Marta pointed out, all operators must provide and share their own best practice to regain trust in public transport. That is the most important thing. And that is now is suffering from a negative perception and as I said, the lack of trust. And so is what also the work we are doing in the Sustainable Development Committee of UITP. So provide the best practice,
yeah,
to share them with the other operators.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? Yeah, to sort of share these kind of and inspire others with what's working elsewhere. So, yeah, thank you. Edwin, is there something that's really working well in your region that you'd like to highlight?
I think in the region, one of the things that we have seen is the move towards increasing organizing authorities in the metropolitan areas. This is now starting to have effect. We have in Dar es Salaam, we have that, and we have Lamata, we have Setu, we have in Senegal, we have Lamata in Kenya. This is a good policy trend that we are saying that if it goes on, then it is likely to start sanitizing the paratransit kind of transport that we have to move towards a formal transport. And in so doing, then we will bring along a lot of things. As you know, that the paratransit comes with a lot of externalities. And we will now look at those externalities and start shading off those externalities and move towards more formal transport, including rail transport, including BRT. I think this is one of the policy shifts that we are finding that if it goes on, it will also increase the understanding or the awareness of public transport and what public transport can do. And yes, we have started seeing people cycling, we have started seeing people wanting to move towards electric vehicles, and I think this is good.
Thank you. No, that's great. Sunday.
I think there are many good practices, solutions during the COVID-19. And I want to say one practice solution is like China contributes is the China to Europe Railway Express. It has actively assisted in international cooperation in the fight against the COVID-19. Since the market demand was very strong, the Railway Express has become the main bridge and green channel connecting Eurasia and help stabilize the global supply chain. And in order to meet the needs of international pandemic prevention, the Express has already opened more than 40,000 trains and reached more than 170 cities in 23 European countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that kind of intercontinental sort of connection really making a difference. Thank you. So we've got 2 minutes left. So what I'd really like to do just to finish is just to have one sentence from each of you. Imagine that you've got, you're standing in front of all of our world leaders at COP and you have one sentence to tell them what your key message would be. Then I'd really like to hear that. So Marta, what would you like to say?
Well, it's very simple. I would ask heads of state to place public transport and sustainable mobility at the very core of the discussion, both for passengers and freight. Public transport is not a magic bullet, but that will solve all, but there is no solution that doesn't include public transport. So I would ask them that.
Perfect. No. Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry. So I would, of course, ask them to reduce their dependency on cars and instead walk or bike.
Great, perfect. And Elisabetta?
Yes, I would say that to them that the fastest and most cost-efficient way to decarbonize people's daily mobility is providing more people with better access to clean public transport.
Indeed, couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Edwins, what would your one sentence be?
I will tell them increase financing or funding of sustainable transport initiatives. That is it.
That is it. Yeah, that'll help. Absolutely. Thank you. And Sunday?
I want to say that trains is the greenest form of transport. It leads electric mobility and rail is ready to be part of the solution now.
Indeed, quite agree. Perfect. Well, thank you guys. We're now got to 9 o'clock, and so it's time to end this discussion. So thank you everyone, all the panelists here today from both panels. It's been really, really interesting to hear from all of you, truly global perspectives. So thank you all, and have a very, hope you get to enjoy the rest of the conference and have a very good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a good
you.
day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.